our research or when we already conducted the research, and to think what to do with the data. Why is my data valuable? What is most valuable? And here again, it's not some sort of scientific framework that you can see on this slide. I just try to drop you some examples to show how the value of the data generally increasing with increase of the complexity, time, cost, effort that's invested in creation of this data set, in creation of this data. So if you have a look on the bottom layer, it's normally the low value data, secondary data, often predominantly quantitative, that can be easily accessible from existing data sets, that can be downloaded immediately from the databases. It doesn't require any particular cleansing, formatting, transforming, and often they do not have any restriction for sharing and reuse of this data. So I think it's quite a common category, especially for the master student, to use secondary data, and for some PhD students as well. And of course, in academic paper, we can see this analysis of the secondary quantitative data as well. However, if you can go further and to say that we can construct a data set using the publicly available data, but we collected this data from different databases, different data sources, and data has been previously transformed, modified in certain way, cleansed, and created data set original in a certain way. And it has this uniqueness. We can see that, all right, this data set has a higher value, than just secondary data that extracted and retrieved straight away from the database. Also, the next step forward will be unique data sets. It can be both qualitative or quantitative data set, and it already requires application of certain methodology, technique, a set of rules and assumptions that we need to use to create and justify how we created this data. Often they're collected from specific set of participants. This data can be large in scale and scope, have high replication potential, and what is really important that these data sets can be used to address the multiple research questions. That's why they have a high reuse potential. Therefore, just based on these criteria, you can already consider whether the data that you're using in your research has a higher value, and it can be valuable and important for academic community, and you can consider to share it. It also includes hand-collected data from annual reports, for example, from different media sources, from the website. That's quite time-consuming generally to create such data sets. If you're talking about qualitative data and some interview data, of course, here we can say that this data obviously valuable, but we can say different concerns about confidentiality, different ethical implications that needed to be addressed. Also, this data can be often textual, often unstructured data set, and you can extract very valuable insights from analyzing these data, but often these data sets are more complex and harder to analyze as well. And if you're talking about some really valuable data sets, it can be different in your field. Again, I'm talking just from my experience and previous experience, what is used in finance and accounting and economics. It can be some purchase data sets, that academics are purchasing from different data providers, or they're getting these data sets from their business partners. And here obviously can be some copyright issues. It can be some issues from data provider, and it's simply costly to obtain this data. That can be very valuable potentially data set. And finally, I think this data that emerge from the different scientific experiments, which is less common in finance field, but I'm sure common in other research fields, and often these data linked to some sort of patents, know-how, and data collection process can be extremely long, to generate these valuable data sets. Therefore, if you can say why you should share your data, why it can be useful potentially for you to consider in sharing your data set, it's of course to increase the impact of your research. Because if you're publishing your data, this data can be available for use. You can promote your research widely by publishing your data. You can encourage different group of stakeholders to use and reuse this data and to see the data. Also, of course, for our field overall, for academic community, it is very important that researchers start sharing and uploading their data set alongside their publications to improve the quality of the publishable research outputs in our field. Maybe this data set has some unique procedure how it can be constructed. Yeah, so the methodology behind this data can be very interesting. Therefore, it's worth considering to publish it. Of course, make results trustworthy. It's very good reason, because if anyone can replicate this study and to see that the results are exactly the same, yeah, they can trust your results. It's also a good reason to share. Increase citations and potential for citations, obviously increasing for the papers that also demonstrated that they attached the data sets, and you can use this data set, replicate this study. Yeah, and obviously it will boost the citations for your academic paper. If you're talking about data in brief journals, it's a great opportunity to get additional publications if it's something that you're looking forward to get. Also for us, if you're also teaching and not only doing research, it's great to enhance research-led teaching, because students can use the data set and to learn how to analyze the data that you actually use in your own research, which is great too for learning. And overall, to increase the reputation and international reputation, because again, results trustworthy, you know that you produce very good data set, yeah, and overall it's a good practice in the long term, in my opinion. What the consideration we can have? Why potentially many researchers, again, from my experience, do not want to share the data? There are a variety of factors. Some of them really psychological factors. For example, we invested lots of time and effort to create this unique data set, and we want to publish more paper, and we want to use these data sets for ourselves. We want to publish additional papers and reuse this data by ourselves, and we don't ready to share it with the academic community. It can be fear of competition, and can be some fear of replications in this in your field. Sometimes you just feel some sort of shame in terms of time and effort invested in creating this data. And if you're talking about purchase data set, of course, cost of data can be also an issue. If you invested lots of money, yeah, and lots of funds for this data set, you can also psychologically have some sort of restrictions and concerns and do not want to share it. Of course, legal factors can be there, like data privacy issues, restrictions from different stakeholders and business partners, so from different project members. If you're talking about multidisciplinary international projects, yeah, you need to consider their legal issues and their legal factors, whether they can share data and reuse the data. Yeah, so often project members and project partners do not want to share some parts of the data with you. Yeah, so these kind of issues can occur. And I think the worst reason why researchers do not want to share their data, if it's poor data quality, yeah, some sort of inaccurate, incorrect methodology, incomplete data sets, sometimes inadequate data sets completely with some lots of missing data that's not often so visible from just descriptive statistics table, for example. If we are talking about quantitative data, we not often can see that data set constructed correctly until we actually can see this data set. Yeah, therefore, this reason, I think it's very strong motivation why lots of research councils and academic journals actually starting pushing researchers towards publishing and uploading the data set, yeah, to avoid the situation when researchers use inadequate data set, incorrect, incomplete data set, and produce some results, and nobody can verify it. Nobody can check that these results are actually correct. Therefore, we can share the data sharing becoming more important and will continue. I think it's really a common trend nowadays in academia. We have requirements from different research councils and funding bodies. Considering data management plan, it's a must-have now for applying for research funding. And often research councils ask you to deposit the data in specific depositories and to ensure the data is available for reuse. It's also requirements from academic journals, And also more and more projects nowadays becoming very large-scale research projects with many stakeholders, with many partners, and often multidisciplinary research. And therefore, all these trends are actually will encourage academic communities to start publishing their data. And if you're talking about some technical quickly issues, that of course it's getting much easier and quicker to collect some data. It's easier to store a large volume of data. Yeah, so all these technical improvements can also encourage authors to share the data and to maximize the return on investment in this data set, to improve the, for example, professional networks, to improve international reputation. And finally, what I want to say here is that, of course, currently it's increased emphasis on impact beyond academia. Yeah, and to achieve impact beyond academia, often it's also important to make your data set available so practitioners, policymakers can have a look at the data and can extract their own insights from it, to use this data and to increase the impact of your research for other stakeholders, not only our academic community. Okay, I give the word to David.
So thank you very much. We've talked a little bit about why you should be sharing your data, and now I'd like to turn our attention to the hows and the wheres. There are many points to consider when you're planning on hosting your data in an online open environment. First and foremost, remember that almost every subject field has one or two repositories that are most heavily trafficked by your peers within that area of study. But also remember to keep in mind a few other things. Firstly, what kind of sharing capabilities does it offer? Can you choose specific locked audiences, or can you opt for a completely open dissemination, making it open to the entire globe? And once you share a link to that data, will the link be guaranteed to be live forever or not? So, is that link going to be dynamic or static? Think about storage limits as well. Does the repository offer enough space for you to host not just today's data, but going forward in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, of course, we don't know what's to come, but will that place be a reliable place for you to warehouse your information as you move your academic research career along? Is there a reputation within your community? And is it a place that's trafficked enough, like I said, by enough researchers to get your attention, the attention of other people within your field? So is it a place where people who you want to be seeing your data, are they going to be seeing it? Does it allow for versioning data sets? For some area studies where data might shift throughout iterations of experiments or studies. For some, it's not less important, but for some, it is very important to be able to host like tens and 20s of, or hundreds of versions. Most repositories do allow for that, but some do it more eloquently than others. Places like GitHub are really great for versioned code data, for example. You want to take a look at whether or not there are embedded visualizers. Sometimes it's really helpful to have that on hand, just something where you can see, even if it's just raw data, some kind of visualizer within the repository. What I could most suggest, though, is that if you're ever in doubt on where to put your data, talk to your local librarian or your PI. I think they're usually a great place to look for that kind of information. And there are also many resources available online. So next, we've mentioned that many funders and institutions are now requiring data to be shared with research. But there still lacks an incentive for researchers to actually carry out that act. With the onset of data journals, some publishers have been able to offer a sort of a carrot at the end of that stick as a means to get credit for the extra amount of work that you've had to do. Journals like Data in Brief, which are open access, peer-reviewed descriptions of data sets as short academic papers, are ESCI and Scopus indexed and are assigned a separate DOI, which gives you, the researcher, another research paper to put under your belt for relatively little effort. There are two different ways to submit to Data in Brief. The journal accepts direct submissions, So that is just right through the Data in Brief website on the bottom here. It's elsevier.com/locate/div. Or about 1,500 Elsevier journals offer the option for co-submission along with your original research paper. You can see it on the right side of the screen here that this is an example of a Data in Brief paper, and underneath the credit lines you see the refers to line, which refers readers back over to your original paper. And on your original paper, it has the same sort of linking back to the Data in Brief paper. Data descriptions within Data in Brief papers can be either attached to the article, or we more commonly suggest that the paper be hosted within an open repository, as we discussed earlier. So I would encourage you all to submit.